Welcome to the lesson on tax code setup. Now before we set up any tax codes, let's talk about the many uses of them. Tax codes can be used by COBRA to calculate sales tax into bids. They're also used to calculate sales tax on invoices. They're also used by the purchase order program to calculate tax into the cost of your material purchases. So let's set up a tax code, a sales tax code, and we'll show you how it's done and show you how it's used in customer setup and job setup. I'm currently in the Job Master Pro main menu, and I'm going to click on the AR button on the toolbar. Then to get to the tax code setup, I'm going to click on Options on the menu bar, Tax Codes Setup. That opens up a window where I have my existing tax codes, as you can see here, but I'm going to show you how to set up new tax codes. The first thing you need to do in the tax codes window is click on the New Authority button, and that will take you to another window where we first build our taxing authorities in here. Now what we mean by authorities is when you look at a tax code, a single tax code can be broken out into many different taxing authorities. For example, your state is always your major taxing authority. Then within that you might have counties and even cities that have their own taxing authority and taxing amounts. So the first thing we need to do is build all those individual taxing authorities. As you can see on this screen, I've built quite a number of them already. But they're built at the bottom of the screen. So when I click into the tax authority field, this is where I can enter a new authority. And as you can see from the code, I'm being quite descriptive. So whether your taxing authority is a state or a county or a city, you want to kind of include that in the authority code there. So if I wanted to add another county, for example, I would put in the name of the county, the state, the city, whoever the authority is. Then in the description field, I put in a more descriptive description of that taxing authority, whether it's a county, the city, the state. Be very descriptive there. Then as I press enter, I'm brought down to the material percentage. Because a taxing authority can carry up to 3 different percentages, one for the material part of the job, one for the labor part of the job, and even your direct part of the job, things like permits, inspection fees, subcontract. Those could also be taxed, but it really is based on the taxing rules of this particular authority. So for example, in Ramsey County, they want to add their own 1% tax to the overall tax whenever work is done in Ramsey County. So what we need to do is enter our percentages as decimals. So to add 1%, I would put 0.01 for 1%, or if it's 1/10 of 1%, it would be 0.001, and that's how that works. As I press enter, I can do the same for labor. So if in this county, for example, the one I'm setting up, also has their tax on labor as well, you can put the tax percentage in the labor field as well. Same thing for direct. Now if there's a cap on this tax, you can put the cap in here, but the cap works on an invoice by invoice basis, not on an overall job by job basis. So you can still handle your tax manually, especially on your bid jobs within the program. So as I press enter, the save button becomes highlighted. I'm going to just press enter on it. And then you will see that new authority added to the list. So once you've built in your individual taxing authorities with their own individual percentages, then we can start pulling them together to create individual tax codes. So I'm going to exit the tax authority screen to come back to the tax code screen where we start building things together. And I like to have these examples on screen so you can see what I mean by building tax codes. As you can see here, I have 3 different tax codes as examples here. So the state of Iowa has their own 5% tax as a tax code here under IA for Iowa. Now, they may not have county or city taxes, so that's the only tax code they need, and they don't need a bunch of authorities grouped together to complete that tax code. As you can see here, in the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis, what I did is I created one tax code called MIN for Minnesota dash MPLS for Minneapolis. And what that is comprised of is first the state's full 6.5% plus the city of Minneapolis's 1/10 of 1% on just material only to create the complete tax code. So when this tax code is used on a job, for example, the full tax that will be calculated is 0.066. And the tax reports, both the taxes billed and taxes collected reports, will report the tax to each of the individual authorities within that tax code. So this is how we group things together. I'm going to create a new code, and in this case I'm going to call this MN for Minnesota dash Ramsey. So if we do any work in Ramsey County, then I've got my tax code set up. So the first thing I like to do is select the state's code first from the authority drop down, and as I press enter on it, the description will come out in the description field, which you could overwrite here, but why bother? As I press enter, I'm brought over to the right where I could actually change the percentages here, but no need to. So I'm just going to press enter, and then it will say, do you want to save the tax code? I will say yes. And it adds the tax code to my list here, but I want to add a second authority to that tax code. So I'm just going to come right back down here into my tax code building area, and I'm going to select the second authority, which in this case would be Ramsey County. And as I press enter on the authority, I just press enter through the fields until that is saved. So now this individual tax code called MN Ramsey encompasses two different taxing authorities. So again, when we use this on an invoice or a purchase order or an estimate, the full tax on material would be 6.6% on material and 1/10 of 1% on labor only, because it adds up all the authorities' tax percentages within that one tax code. Let's do that again. I'm going to do a new tax code, so I'll click New, and it clears out my edit fields down at the bottom. In this case, I want to do Wisconsin-St. Croix. So the first authority I'm going to select is Wisconsin State, okay, with its 5.5% tax, and I'm just pressing enter through the fields. I'm going to press enter on yes to add it. So there it is. But I want to add St. Croix County's authority to the tax code. So I'm going to open my authority drop down, select St. Croix, and press enter all the way through until it's added to the tax code. So the individual tax code really, again, is encompassed by all the authorities that make up that tax code. And you can have as many authorities as you want. It's not unusual, for example, that in Minneapolis there's also a county tax, so there could be a state, a city, and a county tax all within one tax code. But that's how you build them. Now let's see how we use them. I'm going to exit out of the tax code screen and out of the AR Center, and I'm going to click into the Customer Center. And I'm going to bring up an existing customer. Now remember, you can default your tax codes in the system. So if you only deal with one tax code or maybe a couple of them, you can default the system's tax codes. And that is done under Option Customer Defaults. So if you generally just work with one main tax code or just a couple of them, you can tell the system what your normal tax code is, and then when you set up a new customer, that tax code will prevail, although you can always override it at any time. Now, back at the main customer screen on Customer Center, if I go into the General tab, I can see the tax code that was set up with this customer, and I can change it at any time by clicking into the drop down for the tax codes. Now, if a customer is set up with a tax code, then whenever you enter a new job in the system by clicking the Job Setup button, you will see the taxable check box is always marked with a check mark in it. In other words, taxable is on in this case. So if the job in this case is not taxable, you could turn it off by clicking out that check mark, or by using your spacebar key to toggle on and off the taxable in that field. So, but if the customer is set up with a tax code, Cobra is going to assume that their jobs are all taxable. So that's the basis for tax codes. And then elsewhere in the system too, like purchase orders and estimating, we can use the same tax codes. So very important to get those set up pretty early on if you do deal with sales tax, either on your purchasing side or on your billing side of things. This ends the lesson on setting up tax codes.